In the Fuzzy Memories podcast, we celebrate the good, the rad, and the fugly of the 80s and 90s.
We're three latchkey kids who made it out alive.
And in each episode, we break down all the culture that popped, 1 year at a time.
Whether it's the birth of legends...
I'm Lyme disease free today, and I have Whitney Houston and MTV to thank. Or audacious moves.
Imagine also the poor Golden Gate Bridge. You turn 75 and people have a party on you.
Yep. I don't want that.
Or even confusing PSAs.
And the stop, drop, and roll. I mean, I assumed as an adult I would catch on fire weekly.
All the time!
We've got a take that will make you laugh.
We've also got thoughts on all sorts of random phenomena and the most unmitigated of golf.
Why sharks can't be trusted, people can't be trusted, and rivers can't be trusted. It's collusion.
It's of the highest degree.
Uh-huh.
You were counseling me to start my remarks with, first of all, bitch.
Everyone in that room would have snapped to attention.
It's going to be basically coffee lids, shark revenge, and then maybe like Matt Getz. God, we need to do something about him.
Join us every other Wednesday to celebrate the hits, the misses, and the misfits of the weirdest decades.
If I could tell my 14-year-old self from 1990 that I would be eating in a Cheesecake Factory in
Beverly Hills,
I'd be like, we did it. We did it, Joe.
We did it.
Listen and subscribe to Fuzzy Memories on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your favorite podcast platform. Hello, and welcome to Broads and Books, the podcast with one unique theme, 4 hand-picked book recommendations, and 2 broads. I'm Erin.
And I'm Amy, and this is a special Broads and Books bonus episode.
If you listen to our regular episodes on Wednesdays, you know we tell you about our favorite books based on different weekly themes. We get gloriously nerdy about books.
So glorious, so nerdy.
So wonderful.
So, we had a thought. Those authors that write the books that we love, they probably get nerdy about books too.
So we thought, why don't we ask them about that nerdiness?
Let's just get into the nerdiness.
Yes.
So that's what this new bonus series is all about. And today we've got Chanelle Benz. I recommended The Gone Dead in episode 36, where we talked about books with some justice.
We got Chanelle on the phone, and she loves books, just like us.
Yes.
But there is so much more in this interview. She talks acting. She talks embarrassing English teachers.
Glorious.
She talks about how she writes, disturbing fan encounters, and everything in between.
There's just everything. It's all ups and downs. It's wonderful.
She's wonderful.
So Chanelle mentions some terrific books in this interview, and you'll find all of them in the show notes in your podcast player and on our website. You will absolutely find something to add to your increasingly unrealistic to-be-read pile.
If you've subscribed to Broads and Books in your favorite podcast player, you'll get each of these bonus episodes right to you. But if you haven't taken that step yet, you can also find them at our website at broadsandbooks.com.
And now, here's our interview with Chanelle Benz. Did you have a favorite book as a kid or a teen that you particularly remember?
As a kid, I loved all of the C.S. Lewis books.
Oh, yeah.
All the Chronicles of Narnia, and also all the Roald Dahl books.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, just his way of really kind of prizing children's perspective and intelligence, and, also casting adults as kind of fools.
Yes.
I really related to, because I really felt like I had this, sort of intuitive knowledge that adults didn't have. Like, I wanted to be an adult in terms of their freedom. Like, I really envied them getting to go wherever they wanted to go and not have to tell anybody. But I also felt like there was just so many kind of truths in front of them that they just couldn't see,
Yeah. Which is,
so I really bought it.
once we turn adult, we realize, oh, yeah, it's not that great.
There's actually a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. That's great. I think Roald Dahl had a sort of darkness to him that
Yes.
appreciated too as kids. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, another thing that we've talked about a couple times in different episodes is classics that we struggled with that maybe for someone else that didn't get back into reading later could have been a turnoff. Is there any classic that you remember struggling with? We talked a lot about Moby Dick, but
We can't stand it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't revisited Moby Dick since high school, so I wonder what I would think of it now.
Yeah, it's
but
a
I
good
do
question.
remember I took like American Civilization, something like that. It was like American Civ AP GT, and it was like a combination history and English class. So it was team taught in high school, and I went to high school in Northern Virginia, right outside of DC. So it was it was a lot of trips to Manassas Battlefield.
wow.
Jamestown, like it was very heavy on American history. So we didn't really do state history as much because it was sort of like we did larger American history. But I remember that the English teacher, she read out loud sections of Moby Dick when we would come in for class.
Oh dear.
Ooh.
But she would give like dramatic readings. Oh, Mrs. Tate.
Boy.
And her readings were ridiculous.
I
and
can
hilarious
only
and
imagine,
also
yeah.
painful. She would sort of be like, and then the whale came.
Oh no.
Oh, no.
He came through the ship. And the history teacher would be sitting at his desk watching her with his glasses off, but like one tip sort of in his mouth. So we sort of had these like jokes about like sort of sexual fantasies that they would have about each other. She also read The Scarlet Letter that way too.
Oh.
Man.
Oh.
But I actually
Like
Wow.
a misguided SNL sketch.
yes, perfect. Yeah.
Picturing Kate McKinnon.
Yeah,
reading it.
yeah, exactly. Oh gosh, I don't know if Scarlet Letters served in that context.
Yeah.
It wasn't, but I did actually enjoy that.
Mhm.
But I really struggled. I can remember struggling with The Old Man and the Sea.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Having to read that before coming in for my senior year at the beach, and really just being like, yeah, here's an old man
Yes.
and the sea and this boy.
And I got it. That's it.
Yes.
That's
And I
such a
think
great example of just giving us books that really have no relevance on our lives or who we are or anything.
And just kind of like cutting the magic out. I mean,
Yeah.
having, done Shakespeare as an actor later and knowing the plays in a different way and just remembering like, majority horrible experiences with Shakespeare in high school,
Yeah.
and so just thinking about like those classics that I might have enjoyed, but not in the way that we taught.
Absolutely. We've talked about how it's kind of a disservice to either read some of those or to teach them in such a way that there is no sort of connection with. It's kind of tough.
Yeah.
Growing up or even as you became an adult, were there any books in particular that made you want to be a writer?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for me to pinpoint that exact
Sure.
moment. Because I think I very early on felt like I was a writer.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That the kind of like hubristic personality that young children have just kind of
course.
continued on for me. And I think part of it was the way I learned how to read. I had a great aunt in England where I spent the first 7 years of my life, who was a headmistress. And part of the way she taught me how to read is we would make books together.
Oh my gosh.
So she would, like, I would draw some of the pictures and she would write some of the sentences, and then we would write some of the letter. We would kind of like work on it together. And so I think I just felt this, I guess, like authorship early on. And a lot of the books I read, the Roald Dahl, the C.S. Lewis, and I had a lot of story books like Tell Me a Story, Tell Me Another Story. They kind of made sort of placed children as these kind of like leaders and creators and adventurers.
Wow.
So I think that I felt pretty early on like I was going to also be a storyteller. I don't know if that immediately translated into I'm going to be an author, but it happened pretty quickly. But I also remember later kind of like preteen entering kind of like junior high era, reading a lot of those like Lois Duncan and R.L. Stein. And that's when I were like writing murder mysteries at school and like passing them around to friends and feeling like seventh grade, like definitely by seventh grade, I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a writer.
Whoa.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Like I read them, but then I never, it was like, oh,
Took the extra step
yeah,
of
right.
creating
Yeah.
one.
And then creating it and making. Did you make a profit? You should have.
Oh, gosh. Can we revisit those? Can you publish them now?
Yeah, I kind of wonder what those early books were like. I think it was partly like not wanting the books to end, but also trying to find a way, especially as like a person of color, a girl, to write myself into stories. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like there's so many, especially classics, like so many books in which you come to realize later, oh, actually, I wouldn't be part of this landscape. Like I wouldn't be allowed in this space.
But at that age to take that and think, oh, I'm going to put this into some writing. Like
stories.
You clearly were meant to be an author. Like it's very clear that it was in your fate. That's where it was supposed to go.
But you did mention acting for a while. Was that, what was that like?
That was, I mean, it was great in a lot of ways. Like it's kind of, I mean, writing was something I was sort of continuously doing.
Sure.
And acting was something, I don't know, maybe I picked up my love for it from like watching too much AMC and kind of picturing myself as like a browner female Laurence Olivier.
Okay.
But I think I started doing it in high school. I had to kind of not even get over, but I had to sort of deal with my shyness and introversion. But I think there's actually a number of actors who are introverts.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to go to like a drama school, and it took me a while, and I sort of dropped out for a while, and I eventually got into drama school in Boston, and I went there, and that was really wonderful. Prior to that, I was just sort of like struggling, and there in drama school, which is a bit of like a cult experience. Actually, it's very much like a cult experience.
Wow.
They kind of like strip you down to nothing. So that you are aware of all of your like habits and armor, and you're not putting anything on the character that's yours. So it's sort of like boot camp,
but
emotional and
emotional boot camp. That's terrifying.
Yeah, it is. I mean, looking back, I'm like, it was really an incredible experience, but also maybe in sometimes a little bit of a dangerous experience, you know?
Yeah.
Like not everybody was trained to be doing some of the things that they were doing. So I feel like it made me who I am, and it really turned me inside out. And I feel like, you know, stronger and connected and grateful for that experience. But I also came away with a lot of school debt, and yeah, I mean, so in that respect, it was really wonderful. But then when I went out into like the world, and I went to New York City after that, and was kind of pounding the pavement, that was a less, I mean, being in New York was great and fun, but it was not, I no longer felt like an artist. Like in school, it was sort of like we were creating characters, and sometimes we would create plays, you know, out of like adaptations, and, you know, it really felt like works of art.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're going to like shitty auditions with shitty directors and shitty plays where you're like trying not to laugh saying the words, you know what I mean? And like in sad little spaces that you're not going to get paid for, or you're going to like, you know, commercial auditions, which feel kind of like some kind of ab fab episode, you know, like pumping and like impossibly tall and thin models are walking by, and you're auditioning for like a Walmart commercial where you don't even have lines. They're just like, tell us a story about a wedding, a funny wedding.
Wow.
I suddenly just started feeling like I'm not an artist right now, and I'm not really enjoying this, and I'm just feeling kind of squat and fat and gross. And, you know, there's not a lot of like return. So after kind of struggling for a while with that, I think, you know, when I was in that kind of like drama school, it was very competitive. And I've definitely heard of worse. So there was definitely worse in terms of like, you know, the cut system and, you know, the kind of competitive things that can happen. But I think that there was so much of that it was sort of like you just had to have like a bit of cutthroat ambition. Like, I'm going to be an actor. This is what I'm going to be. And I don't want anything else. And so I feel like my writing was something I kind of was doing on the side and sort of fell by the wayside. Like I was always doing it and I was sort of like, well, I'll just do my masterpiece on the side. And that novel would just happen and I'll just be famous on that level.
Of course.
And then when I was eventually in New York and I was just, I had a roommate who used to be like a literary agent's assistant. And she was like, oh, you're writing? Like, put some stuff under my door. And so I started doing that and we just started talking.
Wow.
And she was like, you should go to a writing conference. And at that point I was very anti going back to school because I had debt and I was just like, I don't need to go to school for anything ever again.
Yep.
But I started to research like MFA programs and I was like, ooh, I really like the idea of having like time and space to write and getting money. And New York is a very difficult place to write, I think.
Imagine.
Because you're just living like paycheck to paycheck and there's a lot of distractions and not a lot of mental space. And so I went to one of these conferences. It wasn't like anything fancy, but it was very, very restorative. And I brought like a novel I've been working on and I had this really great mentor there who just kind of reoriented me and was like, you're a writer. And I felt like I could breathe. Like after a long time of kind of striving and feeling like I had to be this thing, I just felt like, oh yeah, actually, like I love acting, but I'm not that great at it. like I'm good, but not. I have my moments, but I also don't have my moments. And I think it's just like I couldn't really shake that third eye, that kind of like watching yourself. Which, if you're observant as like a reader and a writer, that's really helpful, but not as an actor. And so it was just kind of a relief. And I haven't looked back since.
Well, wow. Yeah. No, it sounds like, I mean, obviously you found the right path, but wow, I can only imagine, and a little bit of seeing the business of creativity versus actual creativity seems like it's even more stark in the acting world than it is in writing, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, it is harsh out there for actors.
Yeah.
Like when I got into the writing business, a lot of my friends who are also writers were like, oh, it's so hard to be a writer. And I was like, really? Try being an actor.
Good perspective. Yeah.
Like no one cares what you look like. This is awesome.
Okay, well, our next question is, could you tell us a funny story about a wedding?
That's like
Just kidding.
nightmare.
I'm just kidding.
First off, no funny stories from weddings. They're all
no. Actually, we talk a lot about our to be read piles and how we add to them all the time.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can share that's on your pile right now?
Oh, it's endless. It's sad.
Always.
We know, yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's gotten worse since I've been teaching. So I have Sadia Hartman's most recent book. She just won like a Guggenheim.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay.
For her work where she kind of does these sort of like it's a blend of research and I think she calls it like creative confabulation, where she's sort of like imagining these lives of, either like the enslaved or people that just didn't have voices.
Wow.
If you were young and Black and coming up and, maybe coming up out of poverty in like the 30s. So I'm reading her earlier book, which is called Lose Your Mother. And it's about right now her going to where the slave castles are in Ghana and sort of reckoning with that. And she's kind of following the Atlantic slave route and kind of thinking about her own genealogy and what her connection, like where do African Americans belong?
Yeah.
Like there's sort of a little bit of feeling like a stranger in America, a stranger in Africa. What is the kind of slave's dilemma if you're severed from your family, your genealogy, your past, your village, and so kind of thinking about lineage. And so all that kind of stuff is fascinating. Like, I'm like, why am I not Sadia Hartman? I'm not sure.
You mentioned that you're not reading maybe as much as you want to right now, which, life. But have you read anything that surprised you recently over the last year or however long?
I mean, I think the things that kind of stuck with me is I was reading some books, and I won't name names, where I was reading books that I felt like I should read, and they were, literary fiction that was popular and doing really well, and I felt like I should be interested, and I was just really like slogging.
Yes.
Just like reading the same pages over and over again. You're like, maybe I'll go back a little, and I'm in a different mood right now, And then I just picked up a bunch of books kind of like right in a row. And I read Women Talking.
Oh, yeah.
Miriam Tavy's book. I read, this is one that surprised me. I read Anna Burns' book, which is the
Milkman?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that surprised me because when I first started reading it, like, the prose is a little bit challenging, which I certainly don't object to, but in my frame of sleep deprivation, it has on a whole new element. But I just kind of gave into the rhythm of the book. It has this very kind of circular kind of looping prose. There's some repetition. There's a lot of like people don't have names. But I just kind of, there's a lot of kind of, it's kind of like indirect prose, and I just kind of gave into it, and I could not stop reading that book. Like I just started like whipping through it, and I was just so deeply caught up in a way that I hadn't felt in quite a while.
Oh, that's cool.
And then I read Ghost Wall, which is my favorite book of 2019, although I think it might have come out the year before, which is by Sarah Moss. And she's actually an established British writer who I had never heard of, like got some like Booker nominations and that kind of thing. And it's this book that really kind of hits all my spots. It's about this girl, and she's with her family, and they're with these, they're kind of like archaeological reenactors, where there's like a professor and a student, and they go back and they're trying to like reenact the way that Iron Age Britons would have like experienced the forest and stuff. But there's a kind of darker underside to it. And it's more of a novella than a novel. Mm-hmm. And I loved it. Like, it was one of those books where I came to the end, I slowed down because I was like, oh no. And I mean, that's like that's when you were like 12 years old. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I fucking love that. And, and I got to the end and I like wanted to read it again. So I really cannot remember the last time I felt that about a book. And so I'm kind of excited to look at the rest of what she's written.
Yeah, like her other books.
Yeah. And it's not a perfect book. I mean, I feel like when I think about all of my favorite books, they all are flawed, which I think is interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that end was a little fast, but I think probably people have the same complaint about my books. So there you go.
So how do you usually find your book recommendations?
I might look on like sort of LitHub or something like that. Mm-hmm. I also, we have a great local bookstore here in Memphis called Novel. So I might just kind of wander and see what's kind of facing me, or what's kind of staff recommendations in the bookstore. I don't use Amazon really. I don't use it for books for sure. But I do use the kind of like recommendations tab where you kind of curate.
Oh, yeah.
So I just use it. I have like a list. So when I'm like at a bookstore, I'll look on my Amazon list, and that's where I buy the books.
Oh, that's a great idea.
But the curated, like, it kind of just keeps like throwing up new ones and titles like these. And so I kind of just use their, algorithm, which it's not the best. And obviously it's pushing certain books, and so I also appreciate that you can read little excerpts mostly on Amazon. That's a good point. That you can't necessarily read on like IndieBound and stuff like that. I think that's a flaw. So I'll read an excerpt, and that, if it grabs me, I'll put it on my list.
We recommended The Gone Dead in an episode where we were talking about justice, books that dig into hidden stories and bring some truths to light. And then I've also read The Man Who Shot Out My Eye Is Dead. And both of them are so different, so unique, but it got us thinking, were any books inspiration or things that, really got you thinking about the topics for those books?
The Man Who Shot Out My Eye Is Dead. There's a lot of different inspirations in there because it is a story collection. But I had read David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas. And one of my favorite books. And I sort of thought, well, what if I kind of set up an experiment for myself? And this is when I was still in grad school. And I was like, what if I wrote a spy story? What if I wrote a Western? So I kind of just set it up as an experiment for myself. And that's sort of the genesis of that collection.
Well, it worked. There were so many different formats, so many different types of stories.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I think as I did it, like certain themes began to emerge and certain obsessions began to emerge, some more fortuitous than others. But I think that book, each story, I often had like a playlist because I also had to, especially ones that sold, like I had to switch back and forth between stories. So I had like kind of a CD playlist, like certain songs that might help me get in, or certain like word lists, or certain things that I was thinking about. And I, for the opening story, a lot of times my research is part of the inspiration. But one of the things was Michael Ondaatje. One of his earliest books is called Billy the Kid. But it's sort of a genre bending piece. Like it's prose, but it's poetry, but it's fiction, but it's not. And there's also like some photographs, or also places where like there should be a photograph. So this very like 70s experimental short little book that is just beautiful and weird.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then for The Gotten Dead, it was coming from a place of wanting to write about these characters and more like research. But I did get stuck where I had a hard time for years getting the main protagonist, Billy, getting her voice. I tried first person, third person. I tried past tense, present tense. I tried close. I tried distant. And I really couldn't access her. And partly it was because I felt like third person was right, but I hadn't written a lot of third person. So it did, it's not as voicey as some of the pieces that I've written. And so it wasn't really until I realized that it wasn't just her story, that this is the story of a town, the story of the Delta, that it's a communal story. And that there needs to be other voices. Like she's not going to, quite often, especially something traumatic, no one person has a monopoly on that truth. And so she's not going to be able to really tell us the story of what happened to her father. She wasn't there. And other people are going to have to do that. And it's going to be the combination of these other people's knowledge where we get some kind of cohesive picture. And so once I started writing from different characters' perspectives, then I sort of got her as a whole person. And part of that is other characters can do a lot of that work. Like they can tell you what they think of that, what they think of that protagonist.
For sure, yeah.
So the protagonist doesn't have to carry the burden of like, I'm like this, which feels very clunky and false. And so I thought about William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying, which I think is his most accessible book. But it has all these different characters' perspectives. But the mother's death, Addie, she is the hub, right? She's the wheel. Her death, her impending death is a thing that all these characters are sort of spiraling around. And so for me, Billy's father, his death is that thing that everybody's sort of spun out from. And so once I kind of conceptualized that, the book really started to open up for me. So I kind of read certain books because I'm just getting like power off the language or inspired, and sometimes that means poetry, or I'm using certain books as research.
I love the idea of the playlist too, to get you in the back and forth and get you in the headspace for writing in those different stories. That's terrific. Yeah. Someone would probably really like to have those playlists. Like it's another monetary opportunity.
You might say, yeah.
Well, we have been asking some of the authors that we talk to kind of like our top 5 questions that we want to cover. And the first one, not to sound too much like the wedding question, but we're fascinated by fan interactions with authors. And so do you have any interesting or weird fan interactions that you'd be willing to share?
It's that last part that's always the tricky one.
Well, one thing that happened, you have to tell me if this qualified, is I have gotten a couple letters to my house.
Oh.
Not sure how that
doesn't
happened.
seem right.
No, I'm not sure how they found me. But and I've also like paid to take myself off of white pages.
Oh my God.
But a couple letters came to me, and a couple were just one seemed like a normal person.
Seemed like a normal person.
Where they want me to sign like index cards and send it to them.
What?
I think this is a thing.
Okay.
The other was strange, but not a scary person. And
Okay, I was thinking we were going scary. Yeah.
the other was from prison.
What?
Oh.
Which, hey, I am obviously interested in the issues of mass incarceration and
Yes,
justice in our justice system. So I was like, oh, okay. You know, I have corresponded before with someone in prison. It was very different circumstances, but that's fine. But when I opened the letter, it was just like, I've discovered you.
Oh,
You're the
God.
real thing. And I was like, oh, this is nice. But then it went on to say like, you know, you can look up what I've done and you'll see that it's like really a big mistake. And it has to do with my ex-wife, and just like went on and on.
Oh, no.
And then he talked about his own writing and like kind of what a genius he is. So it was very like strange, narcissistic kind of like, you're wonderful and I've recognized how wonderful you are because I'm
I'm more wonderful
myself.
Yeah.
And like really, it was quite long. And but I also just found it so strange that he like referenced his crime and sort of like, and he didn't say what he did, but he was just like, you know, kind of litigating basically, advocating for his innocence, and you know, it's because of his religious ex-wife. That's the real problem. Without like really talking about what he did. So I haven't had the chance to like look it up because I was like,
yeah, I'd be afraid to. Yeah. I'm still stuck on how they sent it to your house.
Yeah.
well,
Oh boy.
the internet, guys.
I know, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's true.
But I was kind of like, so this person could just show up at my house.
Yeah, that's not.
Good thing I don't answer the door when people knock.
I do the same thing. Just hide from anyone coming to the door. No. Well, thinking of maybe happier times, did you have any authors that, you know, before you were published your collection and then your novel, any authors that you really wanted to meet and then you got an opportunity to, and then it went well?
I did get to meet Ben Fountain a few months ago, and he was just this like lovely and attentive guy and just so thoughtful. The kind of person, like when you're with them, they're like truly present with you.
Oh, wow.
And you know who's really like that is I once met Ben Kingsley, the actor.
Whoa.
And he had huge, massive, like deep brown eyes. And he just said, hello, Chanelle. And it was like the world behind me just like went all shimmery, you know, like it was me and him like, alone on this earth. And, you know, it just really makes you feel like you're the only person in the room that they're talking to.
Wow.
And so I think that that's like, you know, that's part of his like actor magic. But I also think people who are like, you know, practice meditation or something are truly present, really just kind of like let the bullshit fall away and are just like really talking to you as a person and human and really listening.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really felt like Ben Fountain just kind of exuded this sort of like lovely goodwill.
What, you know, you talked about a few of your favorite books, but is there a book that you think everybody should read?
Heavy by Kiese Lehman.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great choice.
I
That
read
one was-
Casey's book.
Yeah.
I fucking love him as a human, as a writer. And I just finished it, and I thought of all these people who would be rocked if they read this book and needed to read this book. I needed to like see what he was seeing, you know?
Yes. Yeah, there was some gut punches of moments in that book. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so then our last one, because at the end of our podcast, we take some time and talk about maybe what we're obsessed with pop culture right now. So it might be a podcast, a musical artist, whatever.
TV,
yeah,
movie.
TV, movie, anything. So what's your current pop culture obsession?
I have no idea what is happening in music. I know there's a lot of great TV out, but I get sort of overwhelmed, and I'm also like up late a lot. So I have to say that what I do more than anything is listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
And, you know, I listen to I have the My Favorite Murder and all that kind of stuff, and Pod Save America. I also listen to a podcast called, this is so hard because there's like a bunch. This Podcast Will Kill You.
Oh, I haven't heard of that one.
Which is basically like these two epidemiologists. And I am not a science person, let me tell you. But these two epidemiologists talking about, you know, the one that got me hooked was this one they did on belladonna, where they're talking about like, you know, where it comes from, where it first, like the history of it, where it first showed up in literature, but also like the, oh gosh, I don't even have the words for it, the sort of biology of it, and then sort of like the uses and cures. And they also do it with stuff like yellow fever and things like that. And, you know, I'm really interested in history, so I love that. But I also just sort of like, my mind sort of expanded hearing about like different hosts, or the fact that like we could actually cure measles if people would get their vaccinations, like we did for polio. But, you know, I think about, I'm kind of like storing a lot of it, I feel like, for stories.
Ooh,
But it's the history of humanity, because they sort of go back to like sort of like when it first, you know, in China in the year 500 BC, they, you know, there was this little writing where this like, you know, first sighting of it showed up. And then, you know, they did the plague, and they do all these different ones where, you know, it's just so interesting to kind of look at how intertwined we are with disease, with bacteria, and how humans have like struggled to understand or explain or cure. So it just gets into this like sort of esoteric information that I find fascinating.
Wow.
But the two women who do it are really upbeat.
Okay.
Which is kind of weird, but it works because they're just like, oh, I can't wait to talk about this. And so it's like so dark. They're like, let's talk about Ebola virus. Because they're like so fascinated and kind of nerding out on it. But I think if they were like more dark and serious, then I wouldn't be able to listen to it.
Sure.
But the fact that they're, oh my God, that is fascinating. You know, it's very different from my temperament, but
Yeah. Aaron,
Yes.
we just talked to Chanelle Benz.
She's amazing.
It was pretty great. There was a lot of stuff in there.
So
Covered a
good.
lot of ground.
Right?
And one of my favorite things is when she pretended to be her teacher as she read aloud Moby Dick and the Scarlet Letter. And I just pictured myself in that classroom and how ridiculous that had to be.
Yes.
It was glorious.
I think one of the moments that I felt particularly endeared to her was when she started writing her own mysteries in middle school and like writing herself into books, because most that she was reading didn't have girls or people of color. And so she kind of took it upon herself.
It's like, screw this, I'm going to make it better.
And I'm thinking in my head, you were destined to be an
Exactly.
amazing author.
Yes.
You saw it then.
I really liked, I hadn't realized that she had this acting cast too.
yeah.
And that she went to drama school, which sounded super cult-like and scary.
Very scary.
I listening to her talk about auditions was so sort of disheartening, which I imagine
Yeah.
it is. You know, I've always thought about that. But yeah, hearing about it firsthand just sounded terrible.
Tell us about a wedding.
Yes.
What? You tell me about a wedding. I would be so bad.
Tell us about a wedding. I would just have to relate. A lot of times I was drunk at weddings.
Yeah. Be like, I took a present and There was a ceremony?
And I found there was a blender in the present that I stole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay. All right. You know what was also really cool, which is an awesome idea, but she created playlists for every story she wrote when writing her collection.
Yes. Which I love that.
Such a great
I
idea.
want to steal that idea.
I think that's an amazing piece of writing advice if I ever heard one.
Yeah. Just to be able to get back into that mood easily. And yeah.
By the way, I also think that's a cross marketing opportunity because someone would buy that.
Yes.
A CD of the song she listened to. Well,
absolutely.
I mean, I don't know. Do people still buy CDs?
Not so much.
Yeah,
but,
that was
maybe a Spotify playlist.
Woo, really aged me there. All right.
Well, as we've talked about in our favorite things episode, you're living in like 2005, so it's all good.
Technology has not moved past that for me, so it's still a CD. Either way, what a cool idea.
What was not cool was hearing about the fans that reached out to her at her own personal house. We have talked about how I don't like people coming to my door. I barely allow mail. And I get a letter from somebody in prison who's trying to tell me they're a better writer than I am, but in sort of like a backhanded way. Oh, I mean, she dealt with it very like, oh, it's fine. Freaked me out.
Yeah. Also, she mentioned this thing about people sending note cards and you just sign them.
Yeah.
And she said that was normal. And I just wanted to point out that means she's just a really famous, good author because no one does that for me or you. And I think that's normal. I think
we ask our fans to send us index cards.
If you send me an index card, I'll sign it.
I'll even put
Unless
a drawing
you're
on
going
it.
to steal my identity.
Oh, shit. Yeah. I could use our signature.
Although... Who looks at a signature anyway? Yeah, it's fine.
My signature does not look like my
but
signature.
I mean, I clearly she's at the level that people are like, look what I've got.
Yes.
And that is...
I mean, that's a sign.
And it is deserved. You should feel that way about her signature.
should.
You should. I mean, I'm tempted to send a note card. I won't. I won't. But...
She'd be like, listen, I already talked to you.
Yeah,
for the
this
podcast.
is...
Why do you need this?
Yeah, that's just not
makes
right.
no sense.
I'm more freaked out by you than the guy.
I can see that, actually.
Yeah.
Your intensity is sometimes scary.
It's a lot.
Yeah,
that's
sometimes
fair.
terrifying.
That's fair.
What's not terrifying was meeting Ben Kingsley. I loved that, and I loved his voice and his eyes.
Magic brown eyes. What?
I would feel so silly in front of Ben Kingsley.
I would. Well, we all know it would be a terrible disaster that you would all laugh at later, but
I mean, it'd be glorious.
in the moment would be just
so
a
what we would
horrendous
do
train wreck.
is, I would send you over to meet him, and then I would video the encounter, just knowing this is going to turn real weird. And then soon we're YouTube stars across the land.
It would be like, hey, can you sign this index card? I also brought you a CD. And you're like, who is this person?
What year? Is this a time traveler?
Yeah.
What year is
Are
this?
you a hobbit?
Like we said, a lot of great stuff.
She's wonderful.
So we will be back next Wednesday with our regular weekly themed episodes. But in the meantime, you can head to our website, broadsandbooks.com, and check out all of these episodes.
And like we said, this is a new series of bonus episodes we're providing. And maybe you've missed some. You need to go back and check. We've got Mona Watt. We've got Angie Kim. More coming all the time.
Yes.
And if you like this one, you'll like the others because they're all
Absolutely.
wonderful.
All wonderful. So we've got tons to help you figure out what to read next and to make you laugh. And if we've done that, why don't you give us a review?
Do it.
If you got an Apple player, it's easy on Apple Podcasts. If you've got any other player, not so easy. But we suggest going to Podchaser, a very easy way to both find podcasts that you love as well as ours, and to leave us a review.
Absolutely. And if you've been listening to our regular themed episodes, you know that we've taken some great listener ideas too. So have a theme suggestion or challenge? Send it our way.
Send it right to us, not to our home address. Don't find our home address
No.
and send us a creepy letter.
No.
Don't do it. Send it to
No.
our electronic mail.
Yes.
Or to our social medias.
If you need to write it on an index card, just scan it in and then send it.
Send a PDF of that
Yeah.
index
Yes,
card. Yep.
agreed.
You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our website.
Happy reading.
I'm up again. Same night, another dream. Before trying this recording thing, I didn't remember much of anything of these dreams. I didn't remember much from any of the women. And one night of doing this, and it's broken things open. The dreams they're in me, and they're coming out of me, and
Talk to me. I am not broken. I am the most whole, most real.
Cause their despair. I cause their despair. I wait for the word. I wait for the word. Witch. 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 Look at the mad woman in her cage. She was a woman with holes inside her. That was the heaviest factor, the final evidence, the heart of the issue.
Somehow, you understand this. You hear me. Wherever you are, whatever this is, you... This isn't a dream journal anymore. It's not. It's just fact. Because now this is some sort of record. What are these dreams? Maybe there's a better question. Who are these women? Weird Woman is a Broads and Books production. All 9 episodes are available January 10th. Listen and subscribe to Weird Woman on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your favorite podcast platform. That's WYRD Woman, wherever you listen to podcasts.